Okay, let's get right into it. If you're a language teacher, you know the feeling, right? Getting students to actually speak and to do it confidently, that's kind of the holy grail. So, how do you plan a lesson that really makes that happen? Well, today we are going to crack the code on planning speaking lessons that genuinely work, taking it from abstract theory straight into classroom practice.
First things first, we have to start with this simple, massive truth. You ask any group of language students what they want, what their main goal is, and the answer is almost always the same. They want to be able to speak. It's their number one priority every single time. And all of our planning has to start right there.
And that, of course, leads us to the big question, the one we're all trying to figure out. If speaking is what our students want more than anything, how do we, actually teach it effectively? Because it's not as simple as just knowing a bunch of grammar rules and vocabulary words, is it? So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to reframe how we even think about the speaking skill. Then we'll look at two really powerful teaching approaches, the holistic and the incremental. After that, we'll see how to mix them together to get the best of both worlds, and then we'll wrap it all up with some key takeaways you can literally use in your very next class.
All right, first up, let's tackle the single biggest mental shift that we need to make when we're teaching speaking. It really is all about a fundamental change in perspective. So check out this comparison. The old way of thinking basically saw speaking as just knowledge. The theory was if you just pour enough grammar and vocabulary into a student's brain, speaking will somehow just happen. But the modern view, the one we're really running with, treats speaking as a skill. Just like learning to play the guitar or riding a bike, you have to actively practice it and develop it over time. You can't just read about it.
Okay, so if speaking is a skill that needs practice, how do we actually practice it? Well, that brings us to our first major strategy, what's called the holistic approach. And this is all about learning by doing.
The core idea here is incredibly direct. You learn to speak, well, by speaking. Simple as that. In a lesson using the holistic approach, the main event, the whole point of the activity, is speaking. It's all about creating an environment where students are immersed in real communication.
So what does this actually look like in a real classroom? Oh, it can be a ton of things. We're talking about individual presentations, really lively group discussions or debates, or maybe practical tasks, like having a group plan an entire excursion together. Of course, role plays and interactive games are also perfect examples of this approach in action.
But, and this is so important, a holistic lesson isn't just about throwing students into the deep end and yelling, "Speak!" For these activities to really work and not just become a chaotic mess, they need careful preparation and rehearsal. That might mean brainstorming key vocabulary beforehand, maybe scripting out parts of a role play, or just giving students time to practice what they're going to say. A little structure goes a long way.
All right, now let's completely switch gears and look at a different philosophy. This is the incremental approach, and it's all about building fluency piece by piece, kind of like using Legos.
So the incremental view is all about deconstruction. Instead of trying to practice the whole massive skill of speaking at once, the idea is to break it down into all its different sub-skills and language features. Then, you learn and develop those little pieces one by one. It's like building a house brick by brick instead of trying to lift the whole thing at once.
So what's the sub-skill exactly? Well, this quote from the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR, is a perfect example. At the A2 level, a very specific speaking goal is being able to make and respond to invitations, suggestions, and apologies. See? That's one small, teachable, and measurable piece of that huge speaking puzzle.
Now, a super common way to structure an incremental lesson is using what's called the PPP model. It's pretty logical. First, you have the presentation stage. That's where you, the teacher, introduce the new language feature. Then comes practice with really controlled exercises to get students comfortable. And finally, you get to production, where students try to use that new little piece of language in a freer, more communicative way.
So, on one hand, we've got the holistic just-do-it approach. On the other, we've got the incremental brick-by-brick approach. They seem like total opposites, right? But what if the real magic, the most powerful solution, is actually combining them?
Let's just quickly put them side by side. With the holistic approach, the main goal is just general fluency and communication. Getting the message across is what matters. With the incremental approach, the goal is accuracy and mastering very specific skills. The focus is on tiny language features, and the student activities reflect that, right? Free, communicative tasks for holistic, and controlled, focused practice for incremental.
But hang on a second. Did you notice something interesting in that PPP model? That last stage, production, it often looks a whole lot like a holistic activity, doesn't it? Like a role play or a discussion. And that little overlap, that's the key. It's showing us exactly how these two approaches can and should work together. And this leads us to an absolutely brilliant framework that combines them, the test, teach, test model. Here's how it works. You start with a test. That's a holistic speaking task. And this isn't for a grade. It's for you, the teacher, to diagnose what your students need help with. Then comes the teach stage. That's your incremental part, where you focus on those specific weaknesses you just saw. And finally, you test again, usually by repeating the first activity. This lets students apply what they've learned and actually feel themselves getting better. All right, wow, we've covered a lot of ground. So let's boil all of this down into the most important, actionable stuff that you can add to your teaching toolkit right now. So here's what to remember. Number 1, always view speaking as a practical skill that needs to be developed, not just a bunch of knowledge. 2, use those big, holistic activities to build your students' overall fluency and communication confidence. 3, use those small, focused, incremental exercises to sharpen their accuracy and teach specific subskills. And finally, number 4, the test-teach-test model is a fantastic, practical way to bring the best of both of those worlds into a single, super effective lesson.
And that really just leaves us with one final question to think about. Now that you have this clear idea of holistic versus incremental, and you have the test, teach, test framework that brings them together, how are you going to blend these approaches in your next speaking lesson?